And that's Tuesday evening on BBC One.
And on London Plus at 6:30, Kent police fear the worst in the hunt for the missing cabbie. Living on the welfare estate, a video view of Hackney and how Americans over here are celebrating the election over there.
In the Tuesday Western on BBC Two in a minute, Robert Ryan leads the best of the bad men. This is BBC One.
The 6 o'clock news from the BBC with Nicholas Witchell and Laurie Mayer.
Good evening. The headlines at 6 o'clock on the day America chooses a new president. And the signs are that George Bush is heading for victory. He's in his home state of Texas tonight, confident and a little nervous, he says. Michael Dukakis, after a night without sleep, has a day full of hope. He says there'll be a big surprise. The House of Lords has backed the government. It's just voted in favour of charges for eye tests. Up to 1,000 people are now feared dead after the earthquake in southwest China. Also tonight, a year after the Remembrance Day bomb, Enniskillen pays tribute to her dead. And in Paris, Prince Charles keeps his views on this example of modern architecture to himself. In Washington, it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. On the West Coast, it's 10 in the morning. Across the United States, 100 million voters are choosing the man who will be their next president. The campaign is over. Both candidates say they're confident, but the opinion polls are still running strongly in favor of the Republican George Bush. His opponent, the Democrat Michael Dukakis, is predicting a November surprise, though. And to try to pull it off, he made a final dash across America. For 2 days, he's lived and slept on his aircraft. Last night, he flew from San Francisco to dawn meetings in Des Moines and Detroit, in areas he must win to stand any chance before flying on to his home in Boston. In contrast, George Bush was content with one final rally in the Texan city of Houston, where he too is now awaiting the verdict of the American electors. Our correspondents are with both candidates. We begin our coverage of the election of the 41st President of the United States with the Republican George Bush.
Bush's early morning in Houston, the end of the 13-month campaign that began and ended here.
It's just at that nervous wreck stage, so we just have to wait and see.
You know, I'm superstitious. Means I don't talk about it till after polls close.
Bush has crisscrossed the United States with an uphill task to sell a message of continuity that did little to excite the electorate. Soon after sunrise, he was on his way to vote, assured, he said, of 2 votes, his and his wife's. Bush's staff tell him to expect much more than that. The latest opinion surveys still put him out in front, but differ on the size of the winning margin. At campaign headquarters in Houston this morning, he wasn't about to give up.
This is the Vice President. This is George Bush calling you from our headquarters. But they, you know, they've done all this marvelous phone bank work, and all we're doing today is calling people and encouraging them to be sure to vote. It's that critical and that important, and, you know, every vote counts, so I hope we can count on you.
Bush has developed greatly as a candidate, but then he's had much in his favor. More campaign money than the Democrats, a better campaign organization, and a staff that have spent the last 8 years in power in Washington. They gave him his send-off last night, a rally at a shopping center in Houston, and a chance to do his last-minute selling. Despite appearances, they haven't used up all their balloons. Most of them are being held back for the victory celebrations they've promised themselves later tonight. This is Tim Sebastian for the 6 o'clock news in Houston.
Democrats rallied throughout the night in a last desperate attempt to recover. Michael Dukakis had traveled from east to west and virtually back again, more than 3,000 miles in 48 hours. In Iowa at 3 a.m., the tired Massachusetts governor was short on inspiration.
We thank you for everything You've done for us everything you've given to us. We are richer for it. You are a very special people in a very special state.
The Dukakis plane finally came to a standstill in his hometown of Boston this morning. The task here to buoy the spirits of party workers who've managed the campaign.
And I think that tonight, we're not only going to surprise a few people, but we're going to be doing the celebrating.
If Michael Dukakis can't get a warm welcome in his home state, then he's not likely to get it anywhere. But the reality is that the polls suggest the gap between him and George Bush is continuing to widen. In a Chicago polling booth, Jesse Jackson cast his vote, and he appealed for a large Democratic turnout.
One of my appeals to people across the country is to, yes, vote for Dukakis and Benson, but also the entire U.S. Congress is running.
Mr. Dukakis, who voted in Boston this morning, could well use a large black turnout in states such as New York and Texas. But with 7 hours of voting to go on the East Coast, Michael Dukakis appears to be far from victory. This is Michael Macmillan for the 6 o'clock news in Boston.
An American president is chosen by votes in what's known as an electoral college. The contest is on a state-by-state basis. If you win a state, you get all its seats in the electoral college. The larger the state, the more seats it has. To become president, a candidate must take at least 270 of the 538 electoral college votes. 9 key states represent 241 of those votes. The Republicans will count on 202 college votes in 23 states, which have voted Republican in every election since 1968. The Democratic bedrock is tiny by comparison. They can be sure of only 2 states totaling just 16 college votes. But Michael Dukakis should win at least another 5 states, which would give him another 32 votes in the college. Apart from choosing a president, voters are also electing senators, congressmen and governors, and deciding a variety of referendum questions.
Great moment. It doesn't start with a cross on a ballot paper, and it doesn't end with a speech on a town hall balcony. Instead, a system both ancient and modern, which will end up expressing the will of about half the people. That's how many will vote. If the Electoral College vote and the popular vote didn't go the same way, there'd be a constitutional crisis. That hasn't happened in a modern election. And what this system does is focus the campaign on a very few battleground states.
Good morning, Ohio.
Ohio, with 23 electoral college votes, is one of them, and the winner will take all. One thing all candidates are agreed on is how much they love Ohio.
This state is critical. You give me this state, and you're looking at the next president of the United States.
And you don't have to be there either to be seen there. The Republicans have £40 million to spend, and much of it has gone on promoting the kinder, gentler George Bush in the closing days of the campaign. And candidates don't travel alone, but have other candidates with them for House and Senate seats. It's called the coattails effect. It worked for Ronald Reagan in 1980, but not in 1984. Now on what he calls his sunset tour, he's coming one more time to the aid of the party.
Now, my fellow Californians, I want to ask you to do me one small favor. Will you go out there and win one for the Gipper?
Despite the enthusiasm, they probably won't win quite enough for the Gipper. Congress is solidly Democratic today and likely will be tomorrow. Americans have a habit of ticket splitting, voting for a president of one party and a Congress of the other.
Well, I think the American people really are a little leery about giving complete control over to either party. It's a little checks and balance system.
And there are not only candidates on the ballots, there are issues. In Maryland, a proposed ban on the sale of new handguns. The gun lobby has spent millions of dollars trying to scare the voters into opposing it. Already during the voting, they're building the platform for the inauguration of the 41st President of the United States. At least the campaign is finished, maybe.
It's not over till it's over. And then it's not over.
Well, Martin Bell joins us now live from Washington. Martin, it's the 4th American election day that you've witnessed at first hand. What are the signs telling you so far?
The signs are telling me that the turnout is going to be about average, which is low by European standards. We see no sign yet of the upset that Michael Dukakis predicts that he will score. And of the elections I've covered, I suppose this is chiefly remarkable because never before has the negative advertising been so much the centerpiece of a campaign.
This low turnout that you mention is customarily bad news for the Democrats, isn't it?
It is. They need to get the masses of people on their side, especially they need to enthuse the black voters who have registered, thanks largely to the efforts of Jesse Jackson, in greater numbers than ever. But from what I've seen, Walter Mondale did better at enlisting the black vote 4 years ago than Michael Dukakis has done this time, and that's very bad news for the Democrats.
So from what we see so far, and we must remember over here that it's only early afternoon on the East Coast there, it doesn't look good for Michael Dukakis.
It doesn't look good for him at all. The polls, of course, most people have not yet gone to the polls. If he were to win, it would be a bigger upset than Harry Truman scored in 1948 when they stopped polling about 2 months before the election. So it would be a truly sensational result if he were to win.
Martin, briefly, what are the first definite signs of a result that we should look out for tonight?
Well, if you're willing to stay up that long, I reckon something like 1:30 or 2 in the morning, you should have a very clear indication. Look at 3 key eastern states, New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio. If Michael Dukakis is substantially behind in any of those 3, then the prize of the White House is really beyond his reach.
Martin Bell in Washington, thank you very much for that. And BBC Television will bring you live coverage of the result of the American presidential election in a special programme, Decision 88, on BBC 2, starting at 20 to 12 and going on into the early hours of tomorrow morning.
The House of Lords has now voted to back the government on its plans to introduce charges for eye tests. Opposition MPs had predicted that there would be a Tory revolt against the measures, but they were disappointed. And parliamentary procedure meant that the controversial £3.15 charge for a dental checkup couldn't be altered.
Their lordships came prepared to complete the latest stage in this tussle between the two chambers. The outcome would always depend on how many peers the government succeeded in coaxing to Westminster. The Lords were no longer challenging the £3 charge for dental checks. The proposal enjoys what is called financial privilege, and the Lords have been advised to leave well alone. The plan to charge £10 for an eye test was passed by a slim majority of 8 in the Commons. For technical reasons, there's no financial privilege involved, and peers keen to defeat the plans dismissed claims that they could be provoking a constitutional clash.
I think that's a little bit scaremongering, if I may say so. A grave inconvenience to the government and to the officials, to the business managers and so on.
Those 3.5 million pensioners on income support will not pay for eye tests. Many peers think that no pensioner should have to pay, and they tabled an amendment to that effect, expecting considerable backing. The leader of the Tory rebels, Lord Cullen, started the debate by insisting that there was no constitutional impropriety in objecting to the eye charges. He had great admiration for the government, but was convinced they were making a mistake.
I believe that there will be many people who will be deterred from having their eyes examined if they have to pay for it. With the consequence that many diseases, not only of the eye, will not be picked up until it is too late.
The leader of the Lords, Lord Belstead, went on to deny that charges would deter people from seeking treatment.
Surely it must be right to put such a sum to good use for better services, provided, of course, that those who either cannot or should not pay should be exempt.
The laborious process of voting ended a short time ago. It was a majority for the government of 50, 257 to 207. Well, the government had said this morning that they were confident of victory, but up until a few minutes ago, the government still had cause for concern, because the House was considering a proposal to exempt pensioners from paying the charges. Well, I've just heard that the government has defeated that proposal as well by 237 to 196. It will be an enormous relief for the government and has saved the Health and Medicines Bill. And now back to the studio.
The latest from the House of Lords. And in the House of Commons, welfare benefits were raised several times during Prime Minister's question time. Labour continued its attack over government plans to overhaul benefits for pensioners. Yesterday, the government promised more money for the poorest pensioners. Today, Neil Kinnock asked the Prime Minister if she agreed with Nigel Lawson that only a small minority of pensioners found it difficult making ends meet. Mrs Thatcher said it was because of her Chancellor's stewardship of the economy that the standard of pensions was higher than ever before. But a report today from the Citizens Advice Bureau says that the welfare benefit changes introduced in April have left 80% of the poorest families even worse off. The government says the survey was based on a small sample. Labour says it's evidence that means tests won't work.
There's to be an investigation into complaints by investors who lost money in Barlow Class. The Parliamentary Ombudsman, Sir Anthony Barraclough, is to look into the handling of Barlow Class by the Department of Trade and Industry, who issued a licence to the company despite concern expressed by a number of bodies.
An earthquake in China, which struck over the weekend, is now feared to have killed between 700 and 1,000 people. The number of casualties could be higher. The earthquake happened in a remote mountainous area, which is making rescue efforts difficult. The tremor was a large one. It measured 7.8 on the Richter scale and demolished several towns and villages in Yunnan province near China's border with Burma. It's the worst earthquake in China in more than 12 years.
Almost all the buildings in Lansang County, with its population of 400,000 Tibetan Burmese Buddhists, have been destroyed, along with homes in neighbouring counties. Built on stilts to give them ground clearance in the region's heavy rains, the houses crumbled as the earth shook. It's the worst earthquake to hit China since almost 250,000 people died in 1976, though unofficial figures at the time suggested more than 750,000 people had perished. This weekend's quake registered 7.6 on the Richter scale, with effects officially described as just short of catastrophic, and it was followed by about 40 aftershocks. One report said that the area had ample food and water supplies, but its main road link to the outside world had been cut. Troops have now arrived to help in the rescue operations.
In the Philippines, more than 50 people have been killed by a typhoon which has caused landslides and flooding. Typhoon Skip brought winds of more than 100 miles an hour and left more than 100,000 people homeless. Only 2 weeks ago, Typhoon Ruby killed about 500 people in the Philippines. Reports from Japan say that the condition of Emperor Hirohito has worsened dramatically. The emperor has been gravely ill since collapsing 8 weeks ago. He's suffering from a stomach tumour and is having blood transfusions. The 87-year-old emperor's doctor says the situation is now very serious.
Several hundred workers at 2 shipyards in Poland have staged wildcat strikes against the advice of Solidarity leader Lech Wałęsa. The action was taken after Wałęsa decided not to call a national stoppage in protest against government plans to shut the shipbuilding yard at Gdansk. He said the wildcat action proved he was losing control over the workers and was a warning to the authorities.
A jury at Preston Crown Court has cleared a tanker driver of causing death by reckless driving. David Dawson was involved in a crash on the M61 in Lancashire last year in which 13 people died. He'd pleaded not guilty.
It was Britain's worst road accident. A fuel tanker driven by David Dawson smashed into the back of stationary traffic on the M61 motorway in October last year. The impact caused explosions which engulfed several vehicles in a fireball, and 13 people died, including 6 from one family. Witnesses had claimed the tanker was being driven at more than 50 miles an hour as it approached the queue, and the driver may even have dozed off. But Dawson maintained an accident was unavoidable when a car cut in front of him. After a 6-day trial, the jury at Preston Crown Court were unable to reach a verdict and spent last night at a Preston hotel. When the jury resumed their deliberations today, Judge Anthony Jolly reminded them that he was prepared to accept a majority verdict of 10-2. But it was another 4.5 hours before they could reach agreement. But as David Dawson left the court after being found not guilty of death by reckless driving, he was too distressed to talk.
David Dawson, as I'm sure you'll all appreciate, is extremely relieved at being acquitted this afternoon. He's absolutely delighted at the result. His faith in British justice has been vindicated by the decision of this court today.
Dawson, who was badly injured in the crash, returned to his home in Bury tonight to continue his recovery.
Later in the programme, Enniskillen, 1 year later. Some forgive, but few can forget. And praise from the mayor of Paris for Princess Charming.
Votre charme et votre élégance ont depuis longtemps séduit tous les Français.
The headlines tonight. Americans are voting now to choose the 41st President of the United States. Republican Vice President George Bush is the firm favorite for the White House. The House of Lords has backed the government's plan to charge for eyesight tests. They've also voted against exempting pensioners. Nearly 1,000 people are known to have died in a huge earthquake in southwest China. It's feared the final death toll may be higher. 1 year ago today, the town of Enniskillen in County Fermanagh was the scene of an atrocity. 11 people were killed and more than 60 injured when the IRA exploded a bomb as people gathered to remember the dead of 2 world wars. The Enniskillen bombing was widely condemned. So great was the sense of outrage that many people hoped it might mark a turning point in the troubled province and lead to reconciliation. Others weren't so sure, and events have proved them right. In Enniskillen today, the bereaved families remembered their loss.
A single red rose was left by the bereaved families today on the spot where the IRA bomb was planted last year. Julian Armstrong, whose parents died in the blast, left a wreath at the War Memorial, and then the families attended a private church service. The carnage at Enniskillen, through words of forgiveness from injured and bereaved, seemed like it might become a turning point. But the story of the town today is also of a reconciliation unfulfilled. Mari Wilson's death led to a voyage of hope to Canada for 6 young people, 3 Protestant, 3 Catholic.
It is the young people who the onus is on, because the older people have set attitudes, and it's too late to change their opinions. Whereas with the young people, they're still impressionable, etc. So it is their opinion can be changed, their beliefs.
Yeah, I agree with Patrick as well, and I think that if this trip carried on, I think it'd be really, really worthwhile.
Gordon Wilson has received many awards this year, but his wife Joan, a music teacher, has also had to carry the strain.
Well, of course, we never expected it to be a watershed, but there has been a change in people's hearts. The young people and the people I meet, I think, are more loving and caring and more aware of loving each other.
Love was very important for the bereaved and the injured too. Ronnie Hill's been in a coma ever since the bombing. His wife Noreen visits him daily in hospital.
Ronnie could die tomorrow, 5 times now in the year. He was very, very low. But each time, we've left him in the Lord's hands, and he's come back. You have to contend with both the feelings of the anger and the hatred, plus your sorrow and what you have to come through. When someone tells you that your husband's not going to see morning.
Enniskillen has witnessed many emotions, and for some the forgiveness expressed by people like Mrs. Hill and Gordon Wilson is just too much to ask.
No rational person can forgive a man that did the like of that. God, in his great mercy and his great love, hasn't forgiven him. How could a mere human being do it?
Perhaps the most telling illumination of Enniskillen today is the fact that the Anglican Bishop of Liverpool, David Shepherd, won't be attending next Sunday's Remembrance service at St. Macartan's Cathedral. He wouldn't go without his Catholic colleague, Derek Warlock, but he wasn't invited. The Remembrance Day bomb touched a chord right round the world last year, but it's a brutal fact of life in Northern Ireland that in terms of peace or politics, they were just 11 more deaths. Peace depends upon politicians, and while those who died here will always be remembered, as a clergyman once remarked to me, you can't build a peace movement on a single act of terrorism.
Dennis Murray reporting from Enniskillen. The latest figures from the Department of Health show that more than 1,000 people in Britain have now died from AIDS. Next year, the government is to double the amount of resources available to fight the disease. A further £68 million will be used to provide more information for the public and extra counselling and care for terminal cases.
The Attorney General, Sir Patrick Mayhew, has been answering criticisms of the Crown Prosecution Service, the independent body which has the last word on which criminal cases should go to court in England and Wales. It's been said that the service is underfunded and understaffed, and that this leads to delays and, in some difficult cases, to decisions not to prosecute. The Metropolitan Police Federation's chairman, Mike Bennett, calls it a bad service which has no stomach for a fight and just isn't working. But the Attorney General says the service is making progress.
As Attorney General, Sir Patrick Mayhew is responsible to Parliament for the Crown Prosecution Service introduced in England and Wales 2 years ago. It works like this. The police make an arrest, they investigate the case, and if they want it to go ahead, they send the papers to the Crown Prosecution Service, where lawyers decide if there's enough evidence for a conviction. If they believe a prosecution would be in the public interest, the case goes to court. But critics say the new service still isn't working properly. The Crown Prosecution Service has to pay defence solicitors like Tony Edwards to work as freelance prosecutors because they've never had enough staff of their own.
They obviously have an enormous recruitment difficulty, as do all of us who work as criminal lawyers in London. That means that the caseloads on individual lawyers within the service are very heavy, and that undoubtedly has meant that some cases would not be reviewed as thoroughly as they may be in a perfect world.
Some senior police officers believe the system is working well, but the Metropolitan Police Federation, representing junior ranks in London, says that the prosecution service is throwing out cases that it might have won in court. Martin Smith, a special constable as well as a solicitor, advises a number of police officers.
They're very demoralised by the fact that they do their job under very difficult circumstances. They present the evidence to the Crown Prosecution Service only to see it thrown away, watered down, or simply the case doesn't go forward at all and justice isn't done.
Of course, a police officer will be disappointed and even resentful, and wholly understandably. But what is the purpose of the Crown Prosecution Service? It was set up by Parliament following a royal commission to provide an independent legal review of every case that is charged by a police officer. Now, there has to be enough evidence before somebody can properly be made the subject of criminal proceedings, prosecuted. Because otherwise, as the Royal Commission said, it's unfair on the citizen and it is a waste of the resources of the court.
Sir Patrick told me he'd won recent pay rises for prosecutors and was seeking still more. He hoped this would solve the staffing problems of a service which he believed was already working well.
The Prince and Princess of Wales have been praised by the Mayor of Paris on the second day of their visit to France. The Princess for her charm and elegance, and the Prince for his concern for the less well-off. In turn, Prince Charles has paid tribute to the French for conserving their architecture and for showing concern for town planning.
The day began with an example of urban renewal that clearly delighted the Prince of Wales. A redundant railway station has been transformed into the Musée d'Orsay, the newest art gallery in Paris. The advertisements that once lined the platforms have been replaced by a priceless collection of 19th century French paintings. Next came an official reception, where the royal guests were greeted by the Mayor of Paris, Jacques Chirac. In his speech of welcome, he acknowledged the impact made by the princess.
Votre charme et votre élégance ont depuis longtemps séduit tous les Français.
Her charm and elegance, he said, had already seduced the French people.
Récemment en Angleterre, je crois bien avoir...
In his speech, the prince said he'd caused an interesting row in Britain over his views on architecture. He went on, I wouldn't dream of doing so here in France. But one or two French people have already said they would be interested to hear my views, but only in private. He then went to see the most controversial building in France, the Arche de la Défense, a 35-story office block nearing completion on the edge of Paris. The architect is now dead, but the arguments about his extraordinary building continue. The prince, surrounded by the project leaders, expressed a diplomatic interest. The princess, meanwhile, was at one of the world's best-known medical centres, the Pasteur Institute. Research work here helped to identify the AIDS virus, and she was shown the efforts now being made to find a cure. Then, away from the cameras, the princess was taken to the private rooms where AIDS patients are being treated. This is Peter Gould for the 6 o'clock news in Paris.
And that was the 6 o'clock news on Tuesday, the 8th of November. The United States is making its choice of president. An exhausted Michael Dukakis, without proper sleep for 2 days, campaigned until the polls opened. He said, "This race is within our grasp."
But all the signs are that George Bush is heading for the White House. His last message before voting began, "It's in the hands of the gods and the American people."
Martin Lewis in London and Michael Burke in Washington will have the latest news at 9 o'clock. From us, good night.